story here at home breaking so many hearts. A Southwest Baltimore mom has officially been charged with the murder of her two young children. Jamiria Hall remains locked up tonight. WMER2 News' Dave Detling has been following the story, and he got a hold of the charging documents and has more from the neighborhood where those children died.
Well, we spoke to a hazmat crew who is inside apartment 1 cleaning up the remains of this tragic scene. They will be back on scene tomorrow to finalize. This all comes as charging documents reveal what exactly investigators found inside that apartment. We want to warn you, the details are disturbing.
The foul odor emanating from apartment 1106 at Coventry Homes had become impossible to ignore. On August 24, 2021, a maintenance worker finally unlocked the door, unprepared for the horror waiting inside. What he discovered would forever haunt the quiet Southwest Baltimore community. The decomposing bodies of two innocent children. Welcome to Shadows of Crime, where we explore the darkest corners of human behavior. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our community seeking truth and justice in these disturbing cases. Tonight, we examine a case that defies comprehension. A mother who, after fighting to regain custody of her children, committed the unthinkable. 8-year-old Davin Thomas and his 6-year-old sister Denaria had been dead for days when authorities found them. Davin lay face down in a sleeping bag, a knife protruding from his chest and a plastic bag wrapped around his head. His little sister Denaria was discovered in the bathtub, something tied around her neck. But where was their mother? As police launched a desperate search for 28-year-old Jamiria Hall, disturbing details began to surface. A neighbor reported hearing the terrified voice of little Denaria screaming, "Mommy, no!" just days before. What transformed this mother into someone capable of such violence against her own flesh and blood? The tragedy becomes even more incomprehensible when you learn that Hall had previously lost custody of these children following a 2018 arson conviction, only to win them back. The system designed to protect Davin and Denaria had returned them to their eventual killer. What warning signs were missed? How did a mother entrusted with her children's care become their executioner? And most importantly, how did a system created to protect vulnerable children fail so catastrophically? Tonight, we piece together the events that led to this heartbreaking crime, examine the systemic failures that allowed it to happen, and search for answers that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. This is not just another true crime story. This is a call to vigilance for communities everywhere. At 28 years old, Jamiria Hall presented a complex and contradictory figure to those who encountered her. A Baltimore native residing in the Coventry Homes apartment complex, Hall's life with her two children, Davin Thomas Jr. and Denaria Thomas, appeared ordinary on the surface. Yet beneath this facade lay troubling behavioral patterns that, in retrospect, signaled the danger to come. Those who lived near apartment 1106 described Davin as an energetic 8-year-old boy with a gentle disposition. His sister Denaria, just 6, was known for her bright smile and playful nature. Residents of the complex often saw the children outside, interacting with neighborhood pets and forming friendships with other kids in the area. One neighbor recalled how Davin would always ask to pet her dog, his face lighting up with each encounter. Denaria, with her infectious laugh, quickly became a favorite among the community's adults. "Those children were wonderful. Always polite, always happy to see you," said one resident who requested anonymity. "You'd never know what was happening behind closed doors." What struck many neighbors as unusual was the stark contrast between the children's openness and their mother's isolation. Hall rarely engaged with the community, keeping interactions brief and impersonal. Multiple residents reported seeing her sitting alone in her parked car for hours, sometimes late into the night, while the children presumably remained in the apartment. "She kept to herself, didn't want to talk to anybody," explained another neighbor. "We'd see her come and go, but she never stopped to chat like most folks around here do." This withdrawal from community life intensified in the weeks preceding the murders. Hall's appearances became increasingly sporadic, and when seen, neighbors noted changes in her demeanor. One resident described an encounter where Hall appeared disoriented, talking to herself as she walked to her apartment. The children's behavior also began to shift. Once outgoing and carefree, Davin and Denaria grew quieter, less likely to play outside. A woman who lived directly below their apartment mentioned hearing unusual noises, raised voices, objects being moved around at odd hours, and crying. "I thought about saying something," she admitted, "but you don't want to interfere in how someone raises their kids." Hall's relationship with her children remained largely private, though fragments emerged through observations and later investigations. School records indicated inconsistent attendance for both children, with teachers noting periods of unexplained absences. When present, both Davin and Daneria performed adequately academically, but occasionally appeared tired or withdrawn. What few people in the Coventry Homes community knew was that Child Protective Services had previous involvement with the family. The specifics remain confidential, but Commissioner Michael Harrison later confirmed CPS had been involved prior to the 2021 murders. This involvement apparently wasn't enough to prevent the tragedy that followed. Perhaps most telling was Hall's pattern of creating distance between herself and potential support systems. Family members later revealed that she would frequently change phone numbers, move without notice, and cut contact for extended periods. This isolation, whether intentional or symptomatic of deeper issues, created a dangerous vacuum where her deteriorating mental state went largely unnoticed and unaddressed. As one family acquaintance put it, looking back, she was building walls around herself and those kids nobody could see in, and they couldn't get out. 3 years before the murders that would shock Baltimore, Jamira Hall committed an act that should have served as a glaring warning sign. In 2018, Hall was arrested and subsequently convicted of first-degree arson after setting fire to her own residence. What made this crime particularly disturbing was that her children, then just 5 and 3 years old, were inside the home when she ignited the blaze. Court documents revealed that Hall had been experiencing increasing difficulties managing her household. Neighbors reported hearing arguments and witnessing Hall's frustration in the days leading up to the fire. On that fateful day, Hall allegedly used common household accelerants to start the fire in multiple locations throughout the residence, creating a particularly dangerous situation for anyone inside. Fortunately, emergency responders arrived quickly after concerned neighbors called 911. Firefighters rescued Davin and Daneria, who suffered minor smoke inhalation but were otherwise physically unharmed. Hall was taken into custody at the scene, initially denying responsibility before eventually admitting to starting the fire during police interrogation. What happened next only deepened concerns about Hall's stability and judgment. The day following the arson, while released on bail and awaiting trial, Hall vanished with both children. Authorities issued an urgent missing persons alert, fearing for the children's safety given the circumstances of the recent arson. The disappearance triggered a multi-agency search across Baltimore and surrounding counties. For nearly 48 hours, the whereabouts of Hall and her children remained unknown, causing mounting anxiety among family members and investigators. The search ended unexpectedly when staff at Johns Hopkins Hospital contacted authorities after recognizing Hall and the children from news reports. Hall had checked herself into the psychiatric emergency department, with Davin and Daneria accompanying her. Hospital records, later referenced during court proceedings, indicated Hall had been experiencing auditory hallucinations and paranoid thoughts. She reportedly told hospital staff she felt unsafe and feared someone was trying to harm her and her children. This psychiatric episode resulted in a brief hospitalization, during which the children were temporarily placed with a maternal aunt. Following her release from psychiatric care, Hall faced the legal consequences of the arson. She was convicted and sentenced to 1 year in jail, a punishment many later criticized as insufficient given the danger posed to her children. During her incarceration, Davin and Daneria remained with relatives under temporary custody arrangements. Perhaps the most critical failure in this saga occurred after Hall completed her sentence. Despite the serious nature of her crime and the documented mental health concerns, the post-incarceration support and monitoring proved woefully inadequate. Hall was released with standard parole conditions but without specialized mental health supervision or mandatory treatment protocols. In 2019, a pivotal custody hearing took place that would ultimately seal the children's fate. Court records show that Hall petitioned to regain custody of Davin and Denaria. During these proceedings, Hall presented evidence of having completed anger management classes while incarcerated and securing stable housing at the Coventry Homes apartment complex. She also claimed to be receiving ongoing mental health treatment, though later investigations would question the consistency of this care. Despite objections from some family members who expressed ongoing concerns about Hall's stability, the court ultimately ruled in her favor. The judge, whose name has been withheld from public records, granted Hall full custody of both children, with only minimal follow-up requirements from social services. This decision represented a catastrophic system failure. The court apparently gave significant weight to Hall's stated rehabilitation, while undervaluing the severity of her previous actions and the potential ongoing risk to the children. The custody ruling effectively removed the protective buffer between Hall's increasingly unstable mental state and her vulnerable children. As one child welfare expert later noted when reviewing the case, the 2018 incident wasn't just a red flag, it was a 5-alarm fire. The system responded as though it was a minor concern, and those children paid the ultimate price for that miscalculation. By early August 2021, the lives of Davin and Denaria Thomas had entered their final chapter. Though no one recognized the warning signs converging around them, the timeline of their last days reveals a rapidly deteriorating situation that, in hindsight, presented multiple opportunities for intervention that never came. August began with relative normalcy at apartment 1106 in Coventry Homes. Security footage from the complex showed Hall and both children returning from what appeared to be a shopping trip on August 2nd. The children carried small bags, with Davin excitedly showing something to his sister as they walked toward their building. This mundane moment would be one of the last documented instances of the children's lives proceeding without obvious distress. Around August 10th, residents noticed a shift in Hall's already reclusive behavior. A neighbor who occasionally exchanged greetings with Hall reported seeing her sitting in her parked car at 3 a.m., staring straight ahead with the engine off. When the neighbor waved, Hall didn't respond or acknowledge the greeting. Behavior the neighbor described as completely blank, like nobody was home inside her. The apartment complex's maintenance supervisor later told investigators he encountered Hall on August 15th when responding to a plumbing complaint in a nearby unit. He described her as agitated and speaking very rapidly about people watching her apartment. When he attempted to reassure her about building security, she abruptly walked away mid-conversation. The last confirmed public sighting of both children alive came on August 19th. A surveillance camera captured Hall, Davin, and Denaria entering their apartment building around 4:30 p.m. Davin appeared to lag behind, with Hall repeatedly turning to hurry him along. Denaria clutched a stuffed animal, keeping unusually close to her brother rather than her mother. A resident who passed them in the hallway later recalled that the kids seemed quiet, not like their usual selves, and that Hall didn't make eye contact, just rushed them inside. What happened after they entered the apartment would later be partially reconstructed through witness testimony.
We're told how the children were found and about neighbors who heard screams, and tonight, one of those neighbors is telling his chilling story. It shook Ray Cherry from his sleep.
I heard the kids around 11:30.
He says screams of children and tussling that night seeped through his floor from the apartment below.
Whoever was down there was picking these kids up and they was crying. And one kid said, "Mommy, no, mommy, no, mommy." And I heard a little boy through the floor was kind of crying. And right after that, I didn't hear anything else.
Cherry said that happened last Thursday night, August 19th. 5 days later, according to these court documents, police found Denaria and Davin Thomas, 6 and 8 years old, dead inside their apartment. Their mother, Jamara Hall, police say, confessing to the murders. The court documents with graphic details, including Davin found lying face down in a sleeping bag in the living room, stabbed with a large knife, and his sister in the bathtub with a clothing object wrapped around her neck, both in a state of decomposition. And no sign of their mother. According to investigator, Jamira Hall was last seen with her 2 children on August 19th outside the residence. The same night, Cherry says he was awakened by children screaming. The next day, police arrested Hall after she took an Uber to Baltimore County. Later, police say she gave a full admission in detail as to how she murdered both of her children. Cherry would later discover that what he unknowingly heard may have been the moments leading up to the deaths of Danara and Davin.
I'm weeping because the kid, she didn't have to kill them kids. She didn't have to do it.
Well, Cherry was also one of the neighbors who alerted apartment management about the foul odor that was coming from inside the building, which of course led to that startling discovery of the children's bodies.
Hall placed a call to her mother, Brenda Hall. During this conversation, Jamira fabricated an elaborate story, claiming she had been admitted to University of Maryland Medical Center for an emergency procedure. She told her mother that the children's father, Devin Thomas Sr., had picked up Davin and Denaria and would be caring for them while she recovered. This deliberate misdirection prevented immediate concern about the children's whereabouts. When Brenda Hall attempted to visit her daughter at the hospital the following day, she discovered no record of Jamira's admission. Her subsequent calls to Jamira went unanswered, but at this point, she assumed Jamira might have been discharged and simply failed to update her. On August 21st, 2 days after the children were last seen alive, Devin Thomas Sr. encountered Hall by chance near the intersection of North Avenue and Bloomingdale Road, approximately 3 miles from Coventry Homes. Thomas later provided police with a disturbing description of this encounter. She was walking down the middle of the street talking loud to nobody, Thomas stated in his police interview. I pulled over and called out to her, asked where the kids were. She looked right through me like I wasn't even there, then started screaming about people trying to poison her food. She was clearly not right, under the influence of something or having some kind of episode. Thomas attempted to approach Hall, but she fled between buildings. Concerned but unaware of the tragedy that had already occurred, Thomas drove to Coventry Homes to check on his children. Finding no one home and unable to see inside the apartment, he left after knocking several times. He tried calling Hall repeatedly over the next 2 days, but received no response. Between August 21st and August 24th, multiple residents of Coventry Homes began noticing an increasingly strong odor emanating from apartment 1106. One resident reported the smell to building management on August 23rd, describing it as like something died in there. This report would finally trigger the welfare check that revealed the horrific truth about what had happened to Davin and Denaria Thomas. By August 24, 2021, the odor emanating from apartment 1106 had become impossible to ignore. Multiple residents had complained to building management about the increasingly potent smell permeating the hallway of the Coventry Homes complex. After several days of complaints, Maintenance Supervisor Johnson was finally dispatched to investigate. Johnson, a 15-year veteran of building maintenance, approached the apartment with growing apprehension. In this line of work, you develop a sense for when something's wrong. Johnson later told reporters, "This smell, anyone who's encountered it knows exactly what it means." After knocking repeatedly with no response, Johnson used his master key to enter the apartment. The scene that greeted him would forever alter his life. Just inside the doorway, he discovered the body of 8-year-old Davin Thomas lying face down in a sleeping bag in the living room. Johnson immediately backed out of the apartment and contacted emergency services. Baltimore Police Department officers arrived within minutes, securing the scene and confirming the tragic discovery. Upon careful examination, officers found not one but 2 victims. 6-year-old Denaria was located in the bathroom. her small body positioned in the bathtub. Both children had been deceased for several days, complicating the initial investigation. Detective Sarah Rosenberg, the lead investigator assigned to the case, described the apartment as a place where time seemed to stop. The children's backpacks hung neatly by the door. Schoolwork was still magnetized to the refrigerator. A half-completed puzzle lay on the coffee table. Ordinary scenes of childhood frozen in stark contrast to the horror that had unfolded. The medical examiner's preliminary assessment revealed disturbing details about the children's final moments. Davin had suffered a knife wound to his chest, with a large kitchen knife still embedded in his body. Additionally, a plastic trash bag had been wrapped around his head. Daneria showed signs of strangulation, with fabric, later identified as a belt, still wrapped around her neck. In my 20 years of law enforcement, this ranks among the most difficult scenes I've processed, Detective Rosenberg noted. These were children who trusted the person who was supposed to protect them above all others. As investigators processed the apartment, a critical question emerged. Where was Jumeirah Hall? Her absence from the scene immediately elevated her from person of interest to primary suspect. A department-wide alert was issued, and officers began canvassing known locations and contacting associates. If you're finding this case as disturbing as we did while researching it, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Shadows of Crime. Your support helps us continue to shed light on these tragic stories so we can learn from them and perhaps prevent similar situations in the future. The investigation quickly revealed that no one had seen Hall at the apartment complex since August 19th, the same day neighbors reported hearing Daneria's desperate pleas. Interviews with Hall's family members uncovered her fabricated hospital stay story, while the children's father provided information about his concerning encounter with Hall on August 21st. Cell phone records became a crucial investigative tool. Although Hall's phone had been turned off shortly after the estimated time of the murders, investigators were able to track previous locations and establish a timeline of her movements. This digital footprint, combined with witness statements, painted a picture of increasing instability in the days leading up to the killings. On August 25th, just one day after the children's bodies were discovered, police received a promising lead. Hall's phone had briefly connected to a tower near Philadelphia Road and Rossville Boulevard in Baltimore County. Officers flooded the area, and a local rideshare driver recognized Hall from the news alerts. He reported having recently dropped her off at a convenience store in the vicinity. At approximately 8:15 p.m. on August 25th, officers located Hall hiding behind a dumpster at the reported location. She was taken into custody without incident, appearing disoriented and physically exhausted. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our communities. How well do we really know what's happening in the apartments and houses around us? Would you recognize the warning signs of a family in crisis? And would you know what to do if you did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you wondered if you should report concerning behavior involving children? When officers apprehended Jumeirah Hall behind the convenience store dumpster, she offered no resistance. Detective Rosenberg, who arrived at the scene shortly after the arrest, described Hall as vacant and detached from reality. Her clothes were disheveled, she appeared not to have bathed in days, and she carried only a small bag containing a water bottle, some loose change, and photographs of Davin and Daneria. At Baltimore Police Headquarters, Hall was processed and placed in an interview room. After being read her Miranda rights, she made a decision that surprised investigators. She waived her right to an attorney and agreed to speak about what had happened in apartment 1106. What followed was a confession that chilled even the most experienced detectives in the room. She described the murders with an emotional flatness that was deeply disturbing, said one officer who requested anonymity due to the sensitive nature of the case. It wasn't boastful or remorseful. It was like she was recounting a mundane errand. According to the official transcript, Hall provided a methodical, step-by-step account of how she killed her children. She admitted to attacking Davin first while he slept, stating that she needed to free him from this world. She then described how Daneria woke during the attack on her brother and attempted to run, screaming for help, corroborating the neighbor's account of hearing "Mommy, no" cries. Hall confessed to catching her daughter in the bathroom and strangling her with a belt. Perhaps most disturbing was Hall's explanation for her actions. She claimed that shadows had been telling her that her children were in danger and that killing them was the only way to save them from something worse. She described hearing voices for weeks leading up to the murders, voices that convinced her she was protecting Davin and Daneria through her actions. Following her confession, Hall was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and additional counts of first-degree assault and reckless endangerment. She was held without bail pending psychological evaluation. The legal proceedings took an unexpected turn when Hall's public defender requested a competency hearing. 3 independent psychiatrists evaluated Hall over several months, examining her mental state both at the time of the evaluation and, crucially, at the time of the murders. Their findings painted a picture of severe, untreated mental illness. Hall was diagnosed with schizophrenia with paranoid features, a condition that likely began manifesting years earlier but had gone largely untreated despite her previous interactions with the legal and healthcare systems. The psychiatric reports indicated that during the murders, Hall was experiencing active psychosis that prevented her from understanding the criminality of her actions. In a controversial decision that divided public opinion, the court accepted these findings. In early 2022, a Baltimore judge ruled that Hall was not criminally responsible for the deaths of her children, Maryland's version of the insanity defense. Rather than prison, Hall was committed to a state psychiatric hospital for treatment. This was a tremendously serious and tragic case, said Debbie Levi of the Maryland Public Defender's Office. We are grateful that the state and the court acknowledged the serious mental health illness underlying this tragedy. The NCR disposition means that Ms. Hall will be hospitalized for intensive treatment and monitoring. The ruling sparked intense debate about the intersection of mental illness, criminal responsibility, and child protection. Mental health advocates pointed to the case as evidence of systemic failures in identifying and treating severe psychiatric conditions before they lead to violence. Others questioned whether the ruling provided appropriate justice for Davin and Daneria. What remains undisputed is that Hall's untreated mental illness created a perfect storm of tragedy, one that might have been prevented with earlier, more aggressive intervention. Her commitment to a psychiatric facility means she will receive the treatment she needed years before, but it comes far too late for her children. The murders of Davin and Danzieri Thomas represent more than just a family tragedy. They expose catastrophic breakdowns across multiple systems designed to protect vulnerable children. A closer examination reveals a series of missed opportunities and institutional failures that, had they been addressed, might have saved 2 young lives. Child Protective Services' involvement with the Hall family began well before the 2021 murders. Following the 2018 arson incident, CPS opened an active case file on Davin and Daneria. Commissioner Michael Harrison later confirmed this involvement but declined to provide specific details, citing confidentiality regulations. However, court records indicate that CPS conducted several home visits while the children were temporarily placed with relatives during Hall's incarceration. The critical failure occurred during the 2019 custody hearing when Hall petitioned to regain custody of her children. Documents obtained through public records requests show that the CPS assessment presented to the court was incomplete at best and negligent at worst. The report acknowledged Hall's completion of required programs, but failed to include a comprehensive mental health evaluation or establish a mandatory treatment plan as a condition of reunification. Dr. Eleanor Matthews, a child welfare policy expert who reviewed the case files, identified this as the primary point of system breakdown. The decision to return these children to their mother's care without robust safeguards in place ignored the severity of her previous actions, Matthews explained. Setting fire to a home with your children inside isn't just criminal behavior. It's a glaring indicator of potential severe mental illness that demands ongoing monitoring. Between the 2019 custody restoration and the 2021 murders, the record shows minimal follow-up from child welfare authorities. Standard procedure should have included regular home visits, particularly during the first year of reunification. However, the COVID-19 pandemic, beginning in early 2020, severely disrupted these protocols, with many agencies shifting to virtual check-ins or reducing visit frequency. Former CPS caseworker James Wilson, who was not involved in the Hall case but has extensive experience with similar situations, pointed to resource limitations as a contributing factor. The average caseworker in Baltimore handles between 20 and 30 families simultaneously, Wilson noted. With such overwhelming caseloads, families who appear stable on the surface often receive less attention than those in active crisis. It creates dangerous blind spots. The education system represents another missed opportunity for intervention. School records show that both Davin and Denaria had increasing absences in the months before the pandemic forced schools to close. When virtual learning began, their participation was sporadic at best. Despite these red flags, no educational welfare check was initiated. Schools often serve as early warning systems for child welfare concerns, explained Dr. Tanya Rodriguez, an educational psychologist specializing in trauma-informed practices. When in-person learning was disrupted by COVID-19, we lost a crucial monitoring mechanism for vulnerable children like Davin and Denaria. The healthcare system also failed to provide adequate continuity of care for Hall's mental health needs. Despite her documented psychiatric episode following the 2018 arson, there was no mandated treatment plan or medication management protocol established upon her release from incarceration. Hall's medical records show she visited an emergency department for psychiatric symptoms in November 2020, but there was no follow-up care documented afterward. Perhaps most troubling is the gap in communication between these various systems. The criminal justice system that processed Hall's arson case, the child welfare system that evaluated her parenting capacity, the education system that observed the children's attendance issues, and the healthcare system that briefly treated her mental health concerns, all operated in relative isolation from one another. What we see in the Hall case is a tragic example of information silos, said Professor Raymond Jackson, who studies child welfare policy at Johns Hopkins University. Each system held pieces of the puzzle, but no mechanism existed to assemble them into a complete picture that might have revealed the imminent danger to these children. This fragmentation of responsibility created a dangerous vacuum where Hall's deteriorating mental state went unaddressed while her children remained in her care, a situation that ultimately proved fatal for Davin and Denaria. The deaths of Davin and Denaria Thomas were not inevitable. Their tragedy represents a preventable failure, a series of missed opportunities across multiple systems and communities that, collectively, left two children vulnerable to the very person meant to protect them. As we reflect on their short lives, we must confront uncomfortable truths about our shared responsibility for child welfare. The neighbor who heard Denaria's desperate cries but hesitated to call for help.
The crime has people asking why and how this could have happened and what could have been done to prevent it. In tonight's Maryland Peace of Mind report, 11 News reporter Lisa Robinson spoke to an expert in abuse cases about just that.
My expert says we're all in this together, and it's not fair to point to an agency or a person.
I think many people failed these children.
Adam Rosenberg is the vice president of violence intervention and prevention at Lifebridge Health Center for Hope. He says it's easy to blame one department of government, but in reality, as a community, we failed the children. Denaria Thomas, 6, and Devin Thomas, 8. Their mother, 28-year-old Jamira Hall, is now charged with 2 counts each of first-degree murder.
The latest police reports are indicating that the children were heard screaming, "Mommy, help." And did anybody call 911? Did anybody go over to that house, knock on the door and say, "Can I help you? Is something going wrong here?"
Court documents show Denaria died in a bathtub, possibly strangled. Devin was stabbed in the chest. They say the girl could be heard screaming, "Mommy, no." Police also write the children's father, Devin Thomas, said he last saw Hall the afternoon of August 24th walking in the area of North Avenue and Bloomingdale Road, screaming and cursing at no one. She appeared to be under the influence.
There were children who were at risk, and that we're not seeing something and saying something. We're saying things after the fact, but we're not saying something during the fact. And we need to put ourselves out there a little bit. And look, people are afraid of conflict, and I think they're afraid of what's going to happen if I knock on that door, if I intercede with that there. But the converse is, there could be a child who ends up dead if we don't get involved.
In 2018, public records show Hall pleaded guilty to first-degree arson. While staying at her mother's house, Hall disabled smoke detectors and set fire to a frying pan with family photos in it. Investigators also found a makeshift shrine with family photos on a sofa. She locked the house doors and took her children to a hospital where they were found uninjured. Some are asking why she wasn't given help then.
These kids wouldn't have been on anybody's radar to begin with there. And so it's not a failure of the system because the system doesn't really look for things like that. We can pivot towards that, and maybe we need the resources to do that, but that's not classic child protection work.
Lisa Robinson, WBAL, TV 11 News.
To report abuse, officials suggest you call 911. If you're looking for more help, you can call the Center for Hope at 410-601-HOPE. The Family Tree's parent helpline is 1-800-243-7337. The United Way can be reached at 211.
The relatives who expressed concerns about Hall's stability but couldn't navigate the complex legal system to protect the children. The overburdened caseworkers, teachers, and healthcare providers who saw fragments of a dangerous situation but lacked the resources or authority to intervene decisively. These children's deaths should serve as a powerful reminder that child protection cannot be delegated solely to government agencies. It requires vigilance from every member of a community. If you suspect a child is in danger, don't wait for certainty before acting. In every state, mandated reporting laws protect those who report suspected abuse in good faith, even if that suspicion turns out to be unfounded. The National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD, 1-800-422-453, operates 24/7 and allows anonymous reporting. For immediate dangers, never hesitate to call 911. Warning signs that should prompt action include unexplained injuries or bruises, changes in behavior, particularly withdrawal or fear, poor hygiene or inappropriate clothing for weather conditions, parental behavior that seems erratic, impaired, or threatening, aids direct disclosure of mistreatment. Remember, your call might be the difference between intervention and tragedy. Beyond reporting, we must advocate for systemic reforms that address the fragmentation of child protection services. This means supporting increased funding for child welfare agencies, promoting better information sharing between systems, and demanding accountability when these systems fail. For families struggling with mental health challenges, resources exist. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, helpline at 1-800-950-NAMI provides information and referrals for those seeking treatment. Early intervention in mental health crises can prevent the escalation that sometimes leads to violence. The story of Davin and Denaria Thomas should haunt us, not just as a tragedy to mourn, but as a call to action. Their voices were silenced too soon, but in telling their story, we honor their memory by working to ensure other children don't share their fate. If this case has affected you as deeply as it has affected us, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who should hear this message, and subscribe to Shadows of Crime. Your engagement helps us continue bringing attention to these critical issues and the lessons they teach us. Remember, when it comes to protecting children, hesitation can be costly. If you see something, say something.